A pregnant woman accidentally discovered a huge loophole in a supermarket that allowed her to live there for months without paying a dime. All she had to do was hide in the bathroom before the supermarket closed, then come out after the employees had gone home, turning the entire store into her free apartment. She could eat, wash up, clean, sleep, rest, study parenting books, and even work out using the store's exercise equipment. Just before dawn, she quietly put everything she had used back where it belonged, then hid in the bathroom again and slipped out with the customers after the store opened. She set several alarms to make sure she woke up before the employees arrived and restored everything to its original condition. Day after day, she planned to live like this without spending a penny until her baby was born. She knew this way of living was wrong, but staying alive mattered more to her than morality. It turned out that she had already suffered more than most people could imagine. Her name was Val, and she was 7 months pregnant. When she was 5 years old, her mother abandoned her for a baseball coach, while her father simply disappeared. She grew up in a rundown trailer, barely surviving on handouts from her neighbors. Later, she trusted the wrong man and became pregnant with his child. She thought he was someone she could build a life with, so she followed him without hesitation as he wandered from place to place. But while her boyfriend was driving past a supermarket, he abandoned her while she was in the bathroom. When Val came back out, he was gone, and the only thing left behind was her own camera. She was pregnant, broke, uneducated, and completely alone in an unfamiliar town. Someone else might have completely fallen apart, but Val didn't have time to grieve. She had to survive first, for herself and for the baby inside her. While using the bathroom at the supermarket, she discovered a way to keep herself alive. After the employees left for the night, the supermarket became her shelter. During the day, she wandered around the small town outside, pretending to be an ordinary passerby. And just like that, she temporarily found herself a place to stay. Until one day, while resting outside the supermarket, she met a strange nun. The moment the nun saw her, she warmly approached her, but she had mistaken Val for the daughter of a deceased friend and never gave Val a chance to explain. Before leaving, the nun gave her a phone number and even handed her a small tree, saying that the seedling would bring her good luck. Val took the tree without thinking much of it. She had no idea that this little tree really would bring her good fortune, and that the town itself would eventually become the place where she started her life over. As the days passed, Val spent countless nights hiding inside the supermarket. She sat on a bench and carefully wrote down everything she used, telling herself that once she was able to afford it, she would pay for every single thing. Life on the run was inevitably lonely, and the only thing that stayed by her side was the little 7-leaf tree. But without proper care, its leaves gradually turned yellow and began to wither. Worried as she watched it deteriorate day by day, Val walked into a public library and looked for books about caring for plants. The librarian was a gloomy man with a terrible temper and an impatient attitude. Val had never been to school and couldn't understand many of the words, so she asked the man for help. Just then, a loud crash suddenly came from upstairs. The man rushed up to investigate, and Val took the opportunity to escape from the library, wanting nothing more than to get as far away from that frightening place as possible. She found the nun and guiltily admitted that she had failed to take care of the tree. But the nun didn't blame her at all. Instead, she said she was simply happy to see her. Together, they planted the 7-leaf tree in the nun's yard, and the nun promised to take good care of it. That day, the nun prepared a delicious meal for Val, just like a mother would. Under the warm glow of the lights, the smell of food filled the room, and Val felt as if she could finally smell what home was supposed to smell like. What Val didn't know was that her secret hiding place had already been discovered by the angry librarian. Late one night, Val woke up with terrible pain. The moment she stood up, her water broke. She stepped on paper towels, desperately trying to clean up the supermarket. But wave after wave of contractions left her too weak to even stand. She could no longer hold herself up and slowly slid down the shelf onto the floor. There was no one in the empty supermarket to help her, and Val struggled helplessly on the ground in terror. Just before she lost consciousness, she vaguely saw a figure crashing through a window. She didn't know how much time had passed when Val finally woke up in a hospital bed. A nurse told her that she had become a local celebrity. Everyone was calling her the supermarket mom, and TV crews were already lining up outside to interview her. But Val's first reaction was fear. She was afraid the supermarket would press charges, afraid she wouldn't be able to pay the medical bills, and even more afraid that the hospital would take her baby away. The nurse told her that the supermarket had not only decided not to press charges, but had also left her $500 and promised to give her a job once she recovered. Then the nurse brought over a tiny baby, wrapped tightly in a blanket, and gently placed the child in her arms. Val looked down at that tiny little face, and for the first time, the fear in her heart finally disappeared. Then the nurse told Val something that shocked her. The person who had saved her and her baby when she was at her most desperate was none other than the angry librarian. Val remembered it and promised herself that she would personally thank him after she was discharged. As the days passed in the hospital, Val gradually became close with the nurse caring for her, and the two became friends who could talk about anything. The nurse was also a single mother. The two single mothers shared their stories in the hospital, and their laughter and tears became some of Val's happiest memories. Not long after that, Val agreed to an interview, and the story of the supermarket mom spread across the country. Her life began to change. Handwritten letters started pouring in from all over the country. Some contained wrinkled cash, while others included cards covered in drawings made by children. One woman wrote that she had lived in her car with her child for a year, but sadly, her child had eventually passed away. She sent Val what little money she had saved, hoping it could help Val and her baby. As Val read those crooked handwritten words, tears blurred her vision. The kindness of complete strangers was like a series of tiny lights, slowly illuminating the road that had once seemed completely dark. But what Val never expected was that her mother, who had been gone for more than a decade, would find her after seeing the news on television. Val hadn't seen that woman since she was 5 years old. When they finally reunited after all those years, Val felt no happiness at all. There was only unfamiliarity and distance. To her surprise, her mother seemed different from the woman she remembered. Her voice was much gentler, and there was a trace of guilt in her eyes. She said she regretted what she had done and wanted to give Val a home, a real home. Val took out the $500 the supermarket had given her and handed it to her mother to buy things for their new home. The moment her mother took the money, a complicated emotion briefly crossed her face. She immediately promised that she would find them a nice apartment and said she would come pick up Val and the baby at exactly 9 the next morning. But the next day, Val waited outside the hospital with her baby in her arms all day. Her mother never showed up. Val finally realized that she had been betrayed once again. More than a decade earlier, that 5-year-old girl had been abandoned. More than a decade later, she had been abandoned by the same person all over again. That $500 had been all the money she had, and it had represented the only trust she had left. At that moment, Val fell into a darkness deeper than ever before. Then the nun saw the news on television. Without hesitation, she jumped into her car and rushed over. She wanted to help Val, but she was afraid of hurting her pride. Perhaps Val could feel how carefully the nun was trying to protect her dignity because she finally accepted the help. From that day on, Val and her baby finally had a real home. After settling in, the first thing Val did was go to the library to find the angry librarian, Vern. She stood in front of him and sincerely thanked him. Vern still looked as serious and expressionless as ever, but his eyes had clearly softened. Val handed her baby to him. Vern awkwardly took the tiny little life into his arms, looking completely overwhelmed and nervous. Val picked up her camera and captured the warm sight of this grown man holding a tiny baby forever. The supermarket really did give Val a job, enough to support herself and her baby. And having Val and the baby around also brought new life and laughter to the elderly couple's home. The once empty house was now filled with a baby's cries and the warmth of Val cooking meals. For the first time, it truly felt like a home. From then on, whenever Val wasn't working, she devoted all her energy to learning photography. Whenever she had free time, she spent it in the library studying photography theory. And Vern's attitude toward her gradually changed from cold indifference to quiet tenderness. One day, another strange noise came from upstairs. Curious, Val followed the sound. That was when she discovered that the woman who had been screaming before was actually Vern's sister. She had been suffering from alcoholism for years and was mentally unstable, leaving her unable to care for herself. Vern had given up his chance to attend college so he could stay in the backward little town and take care of his sister. From then on, Val and Vern both understood the deepest wounds the other carried. One was a girl who had been abandoned. The other was a man trapped by responsibility. They became friends who could talk about anything. Val's daughter grew up surrounded by love and care, while Vern became the man who was most often around their home. Through his quiet presence, he filled the empty space where the little girl had been missing a father. Val's photography skills also improved rapidly during this time. She started taking photography jobs, carrying her camera from one happy moment to another, and turning other people's tears and smiles into lasting photographs. Whenever she came home, she told the nun the stories behind the pictures. The two of them became more and more like a real mother and daughter. Then one day, a sudden violent wind swept through the town without warning. The nun didn't think much of it. She was carrying a pot of freshly made soup and said she was going to deliver it to a sick friend. Val stayed inside with her daughter. Then she suddenly heard the town's warning sirens. A tornado was coming. Val crawled out of the shelter to look for the nun. But when she reached the surface, she saw a massive black column spinning across the horizon, violently destroying everything in its path. She fought with all her strength to crawl back into the basement. It felt like centuries had passed before the wind finally became quiet. Everyone in the shelter survived, but the nun outside hadn't made it. The woman who had been like a mother to Val, the woman who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, was gone forever after the storm. The 7-leaf tree was still standing. Val raised her camera and captured the heartbreaking scene. She had no idea that this photograph, soaked in so much suffering, would later become a major turning point in her life. After losing her home, Val planned to live in a trailer. The nurse asked her why she didn't ask Vern for help. Val shook her head. In her mind, there was an impossible gap between her and Vern. She had never gone to school and could barely read a simple book, while Vern was highly educated and would eventually move on to a much bigger life. Now she had nothing. The supermarket had also been destroyed by the tornado. How could someone like her ever be worthy of Vern? Fortunately, a lawyer brought her unexpected news. The nun had left a will before she died, leaving all of her possessions to Val. The inheritance totaled around $41,000. With that money, Val rebuilt her home. And even more amazingly, the photograph she had taken of the 7-leaf tree won first prize in a photography competition. Standing on that stage, Val no longer looked anything like the terrified girl who had once curled up between supermarket shelves. She knew that the nun had been her salvation. Without her, Val would never have become the woman she was that day. Vern continued to quietly protect Val and her daughter, just as he always had. When Val saw her daughter sleeping peacefully in Vern's arms, she picked up her camera and captured the moment forever. But their peaceful life didn't last long. The nurse got into trouble. When Val rushed to her house, she had already prepared herself for the worst. But seeing the chaotic scene and the nurse trembling in the corner still broke her heart. She brought the nurse and her children back to her own home. Just as the nun had once done for her, Val reached out and caught the friend who had once caught her when she was at her loneliest. It turned out that the nurse had met a wealthy man who drove an expensive car. The first time they met, he complimented her children on how beautiful they were, and the two quickly fell in love. But one day the nurse came home early from work. When she opened the door, she was horrified to discover that the man was hurting her child. He was a dangerous pedophile. The nurse fought him to protect her children, and the man eventually fled. But the damage had already been done, and the nurse was consumed by regret. Looking at her, Val felt as if she were looking at her former self. She had also repeatedly fallen into dangerous situations because she was desperately searching for someone to depend on. During this time of supporting each other, Val and Vern's relationship also began to change. Vern's sister died from complications caused by years of alcoholism. At the funeral, Vern sat alone in a room, devastated. Val walked over and gently held him in her arms. For a moment, the entire world seemed to fall silent. When Val saw the tears in Vern's eyes, she could no longer control the love she had been holding inside. Vern confessed his feelings to Val, but Val didn't answer. It wasn't because she didn't love him. It was because she suddenly felt that she wasn't good enough for him. A few days later, Vern returned from out of town. He had visited the college he had always dreamed of attending and excitedly described how huge and beautiful its library was. But then he said he was going to find a job at the local factory instead. As long as he could stay with Val and the baby, he was willing to give up college. Val's heart ached. She didn't want to hold him back. She told him that what happened that night had been a mistake. She said she had only wanted to comfort him and that she didn't really love him. She pushed Vern away this way because she wanted him to leave, but she couldn't lie to herself. Every night, the regret quietly tore at her heart. The nurse saw right through Val's insecurity and encouraged her to break free from the shadows of her past. The nurse was changing too. She got married. Her new husband was a slightly overweight, balding middle-aged man who didn't seem like an obvious match for her. But the nurse shared a story about him. He had 2 children who weren't biologically his, left behind by his former girlfriend. When the couple broke up, his ex told him that he could have the children if he was willing to give up his expensive car. Without hesitation, the man gave up his car in exchange for those 2 children. That was the moment the nurse realized he was the man she had been looking for. Watching how happy they were, Val felt a storm of emotions inside her. She couldn't tell whether she was jealous or simply sad. Then one day, Val saw a news report about a man who had lost both legs after being hit by a train. The week before, someone had even stolen his wheelchair. And the man who had suffered so terribly turned out to be the boyfriend who had abandoned Val years ago. Val went to the hospital. She stood beside his bed and looked at the man who had once abandoned her, now reduced to only half the body he once had. She learned that over the years, he had somehow become a singer. After briefly becoming famous, his career had collapsed just as quickly. Once he hit rock bottom again, he finally realized that everything happening to him was karma. Drunk and desperate, he had climbed onto the train tracks because he wanted to find Val. Instead, he was hit by a train and lost both legs. After coming so close to death, he finally confessed everything to Val. The day he abandoned her at the supermarket, Val had placed his hand on her belly and let him feel their baby's heartbeat. He had told her that the baby had no heartbeat. He had been lying. Now he finally understood that a single lie could change someone's entire life. Val's eyes turned red. She wasn't crying because she felt sorry for him. She was thinking about the lies she had been telling herself. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life living with regret. Val went to Vern's college and waited for him on campus for a long time. As evening fell, she finally saw him. Val finally found the courage to tell Vern the truth. I lied to you. When you asked if I loved you, I lied. It wasn't true. I loved you. I lied because I thought you deserved someone better. But to Vern, there was no one better than Val. Not long afterward, Val and Vern got married. She happily kissed Vern, finally accepting everything life had given her. Those nights when she had been abandoned, those lonely days when no one cared, and all the hardships that had nearly broken her, had ultimately become the chance for her to start her life over. Val had been deeply unlucky. She had been abandoned by her boyfriend, betrayed by her mother, and trapped by the responsibility of raising a child. Any one of those blows could have broken her. But she had also been incredibly lucky. She had met the nun, she had met the nurse, and she had met Vern. She chose to learn photography. She chose to work at the supermarket to repay what she owed and support her daughter. She chose to help people who were struggling. It was precisely because Val refused to give up on herself that she became worthy of all the kindness she encountered along the way. Life wouldn't go easy on you just because you had already suffered enough. But sometimes, once you managed to make it through the trauma, you discovered a completely different view on the other side. And that view could make every hardship and every painful journey worth it.